for executive order, a so-called authority for even American citizens to be killed when they're overseas. Now, I believe they also do that in this country, but that executive order is on the books, and it's very alarming. Essentially, we are under Big Brother dictatorship, and those who are not willing to open their eyes to it or who are in denial to it, all I can say is God bless you. Enjoy your deep sleep. I hope that the global nightmare doesn't intrude into your sleep. You know, sleepy boo, sleep well. Two kinds of people: those who will sleep through hell, and those who will wake up, and recognize that what hell is and try to escape.
There's another piece of this, though, in my view, Richard, that even if we acknowledge that what you're translating and what we're noticing and what is occurring is true, the question then remains, how do you walk through the day without accepting so much darkness as a reality? In other words, how do you move through what is occurring, which is extremely dark, by bringing through and attracting light and being available to solutions and remedies and things like that, staying receptive enough to be aware of what's going on, to be preparing as you're guided to prepare, seeing the shadows of what's coming?
Understand that in the short term, really bad things are happening, and in the short term, it's very likely, in my view and other analysts, that far worse things are in the offing in the coming weeks and months. But how do you keep, in the midst of all of that, a bright perspective, as you're saying, a kind of a golden view underlying it all? For me, it's the knowledge that there really is a creator. There's a vast, loving, powerfully positive creative force in the universe. You can call that force God or whatever you want. I don't think the name matters, but it's the reality that matters. That creative force, a creator, or whatever you prefer to call it, has brought this planet and this galaxy into existence, has brought me and you and everyone listening into existence. There is a rhyme or reason behind creation that suffuses all of creation. I recognize that. It inspires me. It gives me breath. It's why I can think and live and know and understand and think and seek and desire and hope. I also have an inner knowing through many spiritual experiences that I have a spirit and a soul, and the vast majority of humanity do. I don't believe that every person in a human body, so to speak, does have a soul. The evidence suggests that there are indeed some very dark and soulless beings on this planet, and they are wreaking great havoc as we speak. But the majority of humans, I'm persuaded, do have a soul, and I think the majority of humans either have or are capable of having a positively, a spiritually uplifting soul orientation if they so desire. So I am hopeful that even in the midst of all this diabolical turmoil, that the human race on this planet, that is those who will survive the next, say, 2 months to 5 years, that there is a bright future for those who survive this coming period of extreme turmoil. I don't know how many of us will survive what is coming, this tremendous economic turmoil that's going to get much worse in the coming weeks and months, and probably the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and wars that are ongoing and killing a lot of people. And it looks like the United States wants to spread those wars to still more countries like Pakistan and Iran. It just grinds on and on. So in the short term, we're going to have war. We're going to have tremendous economic turmoil and probably famine, frankly, because if people don't have money, they can't buy food. And so there are going to be problems on that front as well. So these problems are going to be there. Ultimately, whether you survive or not physically may not be up to you. If you run out of money and you can't get food, or if the economy collapses and there isn't food, then guess what? You may die. That's just a hard fact of life. no one leaves this planet alive. We don't want to hear that.
I think that a lot of people who are observing the writing on the wall are doing what they can to prepare to have food stocks, not necessarily because they're paranoid, but because they're observant that it would be wise to do so.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. There's an old saying that goes like this: God helps those who help themselves. Sometimes people are too passive. I read a story about a ferry. This was 10 or 15 years ago that sank in the North Sea. You may remember the story. There was a problem with the door that came loose in the middle of a raging gale. This was in the nighttime. And water got into the hold, and the ferry began to go down. It was quite a large ship with hundreds of people on it. The only people who survived that sinking were the ones who said, you know what, this ship is going down. And they put on life vests and jumped overboard in the middle of the night into the North Sea into 20 and 30-foot waves. They were the only ones who survived. The ones who stayed on the ship and said to themselves, you know what, this is a big ship. Everyone else is going. Only those crazy ones are putting on life vests. Everyone else is just staying here. It's a big ship. The lights are still on. I'm safer here, going with the crowd, staying on this big ship. You know what? The big ship sank, and those who stayed on the ship sank with it and died.
Richard, I'm sorry to interrupt you. What's the name of this story?
I don't know the name of the story. It's the ship that sank, but the point was there were very few survivors, and they were picked up, a day or two later with life vests. The vast majority who stayed on the ship went down and died. It was a ferry in the North Sea. It was about 10, 15 years ago.
Very interesting analogy and very poignant for our time.
There are many ferry sinkings that happen. They're usually in the third world, and usually the people who die are the ones who stay on the ship, because the ship goes down, it capsizes, then you can't get out. And so the ones who stay with the ship thinking, oh, I might drown if I go in the water, you know what? They stay on the ship. They're the ones who die. The ones who say, I don't know, the ship is going down. Stay on the ship, I might die. I think I'll jump in and see if I can swim for it. They're the ones who give themselves a fighting chance. Usually you read of these ferry sinkings in places like Africa or India or Southeast Asia, places like that. This particular one happened to occur in the North Sea. It's been, like I said, 10 or 15 years ago.
I think one of the greatest obstacles to moving in a different direction than the way a person is going has to do with the illusion of safety and comfort. And that illusion of safety and comfort is so primordial and it's so hardened that it gets in the way of people seeing that what they think is making them safe and what they attribute to being comfortable is keeping them where they are.
Let me tell you something. I'll use a 19th century analogy from the slave period in the American South. Slaves lived on a plantation. Everyone knows this. There were overseers. And the slaves had their cabins they could live in. They were fed every day. It was not, a 5-star restaurant food or 4-star restaurant food. It was with just enough to get by on. There wasn't a lot of it, but you could live. You had a slave cabin. It wasn't a deluxe hotel room or anything like that, but it was a roof over your head when it rained and it kept the snow out. You had some clothing. You know what? It wasn't Saks Fifth Avenue or anything like that, or Gucci or Armani, but it was clothing. You had a job. It was a terrible job, but it was regular employment. So that was your life as a slave. Now, every once in a while, someone would decide to run away. They would decide they didn't like that. Now, if you ran away, you know what? If you were caught, you would be whipped viciously. On the other hand, if you got away, you were free. If you made it all the way to Canada or to the northern states, you were free. You were no longer a slave. So here's the dilemma. Do you like your slavery? Really? Do you like it? Well, then embrace it, because you're going to be a slave the rest of your days. If you don't like your slavery, guess what?